"You understand what this arrangement requires," Lord Aldwych said, not looking up from the document he held. "A wife who will not embarrass the family, who will manage Harrow Park with appropriate discretion, and who will not trouble my son with opinions he did not ask for." Charlotte Emsley set down the tray she had carried from the kitchen herself. The footman had sprained his wrist that morning, and she had not seen any reason to make a fuss about who carried what, and looked at the document in Lord Aldwich's hand. She recognised it. It was the household account summary she had prepared 3 days ago, the one that had identified £1,400 in recoverable margin across the Aldwych estate's supplier agreements. Lord Aldwych had not mentioned it. He had simply incorporated it into a packet of papers he was now presenting to his son as evidence of the estate's sound management. She noted this, as she noted most things, and said nothing about it. "The arrangement," she said, "has been made clear to me, my lord." What she did not say was that no one had thought to ask whether the arrangement was clear to her in a way that implied her consent rather than her compliance. That was, she had learned in 4 years of managing the Aldwych townhouse, and 2 years before that, of managing her late father's failing estate, the ordinary condition of rooms she was permitted to occupy. And at the edge of all that perfectly organised propriety, the gleaming tray, the recovered margin no one would credit her for, the document Lord Aldwych held as though he had produced it himself, was Charlotte Emsley, doing the invisible work that kept the room standing. She was 28 years old. She had been doing this since she was 20. The ballroom at Aldwych House that evening was everything Lord Aldwych believed a ballroom should be. 300 candles, which Charlotte had sourced from a new chandler at 12% below the previous rate. Garlands of white and gold that she had directed the housemaid to arrange at 6 that morning, and 54 guests, arranged in the precise social configuration Lord Aldwych had specified, down to the seating adjustments Charlotte had made to prevent Lady Cavendish from sitting adjacent to the Moorfields heir, who had apparently said something irretrievable at the previous season's assembly. The guests moved through the candlelight in their arranged formation. The gowns were extraordinary, silk and figured muslin, and one magnificent satin the colour of old amber that Charlotte had noted belonged to Miss Isabel Crane, who was widely understood to be the natural candidate for the arrangement Lord Aldwych had described. Miss Crane was beautiful, in the way that required no qualification. She had a laugh that carried across a room like a chord well struck, and she had been educated specifically for the purpose of occupying this kind of space. Charlotte did not dislike her. Miss Crane was what the world had made her, and Charlotte was honest enough to acknowledge that the world had made Miss Crane very effectively. Charlotte herself wore dark green wool, which was the dress she had worn to the Aldwych Christmas assembly the previous year and the year before that. It was well made, and it fit her precisely, and she had brushed it herself that afternoon. She was stationed near the long windows at the far end of the room, because someone needed to make certain the footmen remembered to refill the champagne from the correct cases. She had noted during the afternoon preparation that 2 cases had been placed in the wrong order, and the guest champagne would have been served warm if she had not reorganized them herself. She was watching the footman nearest the service door when she became aware that the room had shifted its collective attention toward the entrance. She turned, not quickly, because Charlotte did not do anything quickly if she could do it with precision instead. Marcus Aldwych, the Duke of Harrow, had arrived. She had been told he was cold. Lord Aldwych used the word as though it were a compliment he was offering with reluctance. "My son is not given to warmth, but he is a man of complete reliability," which Charlotte had translated into its operational meaning. He was a man who had been hurt enough to make coldness a structural choice, rather than a natural disposition. She had seen that kind before. She had grown up in a house where grief, unmanaged, had reorganized itself into rigidity, and she recognized the architecture of it from a distance. What she had not been told was that he was watching the room the way she watched the room, not with pleasure, not with anticipation, but with the particular attention of someone cataloguing what was actually happening, rather than what was meant to be seen. He moved through the introduction sequence with Lord Aldwych and the senior guests with precise, unhurried courtesy. He spoke to Miss Crane for 4 minutes. Charlotte counted, because Charlotte counted everything, and he listened to what Miss Crane said, without appearing to perform the listening, which was rarer than it ought to have been. And then he looked across the room. Not at Miss Crane, not at the candles or the arranged garlands or the careful social configuration. He looked at the far window, where a woman in dark green wool was watching the champagne footman, with an expression of concentrated professional attention, and something in his gaze shifted, not into warmth, not yet into anything she could have named, but into the specific alertness of a man who had just noticed something he had not expected to find. Charlotte looked back at the champagne footman, because that was her job. She had learned, from the beginning, not to count on things that merely looked like rescue. Her father, Thomas Emsley, had been a man of genuine capability and genuine sentiment and genuinely catastrophic financial judgment. He had loved Charlotte's mother with a completeness that had left him, when her mother died of a fever during the winter Charlotte was 16, without any mechanism for continuing. He had continued anyway, because Charlotte's younger brother Arthur was 10 and needed a father who was functioning, and Thomas Emsley had understood duty, if he had not always understood accounts. He had hired a solicitor to manage the estate. The solicitor had managed it poorly, in the specific way of men who understand management as a performance of authority rather than an execution of competence, and by the time Charlotte was 20, and her father's health was clearly failing, the Emsley estate owed creditors in 6 different categories. The tenant farms had 3 outstanding roof repairs that were becoming 4, and the wool merchant contract that had been the estate's primary income for 40 years had been renegotiated, without Charlotte's knowledge, at terms that reduced the annual return by nearly a third. She had discovered this on a Tuesday in March, when she was reviewing the household accounts, and found a discrepancy she could not resolve without going back to the original contract. She had gone back to the original contract. Then she had gone to her father. "Papa," she had said, setting the contract and the accounts, and the original wool merchant agreement in front of him on his desk, in a sequence that made the discrepancy impossible to avoid. "The solicitor has bound us to a rate of 4 shillings per stone for the first 3 years of the new agreement. The market rate has not fallen below 6 shillings in 11 years. I have verified this with 2 independent sources." Her father had looked at the documents for a long moment. "Charlotte," he said, "you should not have to manage this." "I am aware," she said, "nevertheless." He had looked at her with an expression she still kept in memory, something between pride and grief, the look of a man who understood exactly what he was looking at and could not change what had made it necessary. "What do you need?" he asked. "Authority to negotiate directly with the wool merchant," she said. "In writing, so he will treat with me." He had given it. She had spent 6 weeks renegotiating, first by correspondence and then in person. She had driven herself in the gig, because there was no one else to drive it, and she had recovered 2 shillings per stone on a revised 3-year term, which was not the full 6 shillings of the market rate, but was substantially better than 4, and the wool merchant, a practical man named Graves, who had initially responded to her letters with the studied neutrality of a man who was not certain how to address a woman conducting business, had eventually told her that she was the most organized party he had dealt with in his 20 years of contracting. She had managed the estate for 2 years after that. Her father died during the second winter, peacefully, in his own bed, with Charlotte holding his hand, and Arthur asleep in the chair by the fire, because he had fallen asleep waiting, and she had not had the heart to wake him. The estate had recovered sufficiently to discharge 4 of the 6 creditor obligations. The remaining 2 were manageable. The tenant farm roofs were repaired. Then their father's brother, their Uncle Gerald, arrived from Derbyshire with a document that established his guardianship over Arthur, who was still a minor, and control over the estate assets in trust until Arthur came of age. He was not a cruel man. He was a man who genuinely believed that what had been happening at the Emsley estate was a worrying situation that required adult management, and he did not appear to consider Charlotte's 2 years of documented, successful management as evidence that adult management was already present. She had shown him the accounts. He had reviewed them with the expression of a man reviewing something he found surprising and inconvenient in equal measure, and then he had thanked her and installed his own steward. "You will be comfortable here," her uncle had said, which meant, "You will be useful here, but not in the way you have been useful, and not with the authority you have been exercising, and not with any acknowledgement that what you have been doing constitutes real work. I have written to my wife's cousin, Lord Aldwick, who requires a household manager of capable disposition. It will be a suitable arrangement." It was not the first time a suitable arrangement had been made for Charlotte. It was not the last. She had arrived at Aldwick House in London 4 years ago with a trunk, a complete set of annotated household accounts from the Emsley estate, and the knowledge, held quietly, like something she kept in her interior pocket, that she was very good at the work she did, whether or not anyone with the authority to say so was paying attention. She had been assigned rooms in the upper floor corridor, between the linen cupboard and the room belonging to the lady's maid. She had been given a salary of £40 annually, which was the salary of a competent housekeeper, and considerably less than the salary of any male estate manager of comparable function. She had not argued about the salary. She had opened her annotated accounts and begun looking at the Aldwick figures. She had found the recoverable margin within a fortnight. She had found the supplier overcharges within 6 weeks. She had renegotiated 3 of the 7 primary supply agreements in the first year, recovering £400 annually without reducing the quality of any household provision. Lord Aldwick had received this information from his own steward, who presented it in a quarterly summary that did not include Charlotte's name. She had noted this too. The person being overlooked in any room is often the person keeping the room standing. She had understood that she was not going to receive credit. She had made a decision, in the same clear-headed way she made all her decisions, alone, at her desk, with the accounts in front of her and the window showing the grey London sky, that the absence of credit was not going to make her do the work poorly. She was not going to step aside for anyone, but she was also not going to reduce herself to match the diminished version of herself that was convenient for others to manage. She brought everything she had, and she put it to work, and the result was that Aldwick House ran with the reliability of a well-built bridge, and no one who used it daily thought very much about why it held. That, she thought, returning to the champagne footman in the ballroom on the night that Marcus Aldwick arrived, was the ordinary condition of good infrastructure. It was noticed only when it failed. Marcus had not slept well in London. He had not slept well anywhere in particular for the past 3 years, since his mother's death. But London was worse than Harrow Park, because London required a performance of ease that the estate did not, and the performance was expensive in ways that did not appear on any ledger he kept. His mother had loved Harrow Park. She had managed the house with an attention to its particular character, the library's acoustics, the way the east garden held morning light, the specific arrangement of rooms that made the building feel inhabited rather than merely occupied, that Marcus had only fully understood after she was gone, and the house had begun to feel like a very well-maintained shell. He had hired 3 housekeepers since then. All 3 had been competent. None of them had understood that managing a house and giving a house its character were different functions, and that only one of them could be hired. He had come to London because his father had written, with the specific, compressed urgency that characterised Lord Aldwick's correspondence when he believed he was being tactful, that the matter of the succession required Marcus's attention. What Lord Aldwick meant by this was that he had identified a candidate, Miss Isabel Crane, whose family connections were excellent and whose demeanour in social situations was everything that a ducal household required. Marcus had read this letter 3 times, not because it was complicated, but because he was deciding what he thought about it. He thought that Miss Crane was probably a perfectly agreeable person whom he had no particular reason to decline. He also thought that agreeing to a woman for no particular reason was an unusual basis on which to found a marriage, but that was a sentiment he had nowhere to place. He had arrived at his father's house 2 days before the ballroom evening. He had spent those 2 days reviewing the household documents his father's steward had left on his desk, the quarterly summaries, the supplier accounts, the staff management records, because Marcus, like Charlotte, found that review of accounts was a way of understanding a household's actual character better than any surface inspection could provide. He found something unusual on the second afternoon. The supplier renegotiation records from the previous 4 years showed a pattern of recovered margin that was, in Marcus's experience of estate management, extraordinary. The quality of the analysis was not the work of a steward. Stewards negotiated by habit and precedent. Whoever had done this work had approached each agreement as a discrete problem, identified the specific pressure points in each supplier relationship, and renegotiated with a precision that suggested both analytical fluency and considerable practical experience with the actual market. He asked the steward about it. The steward gave him a slightly evasive answer that contained the phrase, "The household arrangements have been well managed." He asked again, more specifically. The steward mentioned, with the air of a man mentioning something he was not certain he should mention, that the household manager, Miss Emsley, had been particularly attentive to the supply accounts. Marcus had looked at the renegotiation records again that evening. 29 of the 37 supplier agreements reviewed over 4 years. Over £1,400 in recovered margin. A handwriting in the margin annotations. Someone had been annotating the original agreements with notes comparing market rates, flagging discrepancy points, proposing alternative terms. That was precise and small and did not waste space. He had not yet met Miss Emsley. He met her at the ballroom. She was standing by the far windows, and she was watching the champagne footman with the concentrated attention of someone who was not watching a footman, but was monitoring a system she had designed and was responsible for maintaining. She wore dark green wool. She did not appear to be performing any role available for an audience to observe. She appeared to be doing her actual job while 300 candles she had sourced at a recovered 12% discount burned above her. When she became aware of his attention, and he noted that she became aware of it before she looked at him, the way a competent person registers a change in a room before they have visual confirmation of its source. She met his gaze for 2 seconds, with an expression of level, undecorated assessment, and then looked back at the footman. Not dismissed, simply, she had noted him and returned to her task, because the task was active. He found he was interested in that response in a way he had not been interested in anything presented to him in this house. He crossed the room. Marcus arrived at Harrow Park 4 days after the ballroom evening, ahead of the household party that would arrive for the autumn fortnight his father had organised. He arrived ahead of it deliberately, because he wanted to see the house before the arrangements for being seen in it were in place. Charlotte came with the advance party of 4, which was the party responsible for ensuring the house was ready for the larger group. She came because Lord Aldwych had asked her to coordinate the Harrow Park preparation, and because Charlotte, when asked to coordinate something, coordinated it. She had been to Harrow Park once before, 6 months ago, to assess the linen inventory and the kitchen provisions for a spring dinner that Lord Aldwych had eventually cancelled. She remembered the library. It was a room that had once been organised with a particular intelligence, the books arranged by region and then by date within region, with a set of handwritten catalogue cards in a box on the central table that someone had maintained with great care and had then stopped maintaining, abruptly, leaving the last 3 years of acquisitions in a stack on the lower shelves without catalogue entries. She had found the catalogue cards on her previous visit and had understood from them something about the person who had made them. She was reviewing the morning room provisions when Marcus appeared in the doorway. "The china inventory," he said, which was not a greeting but was, Charlotte assessed, a question. "Is complete," she said. 47 pieces in the Wedgwood service, which is one fewer than the inventory from 18 months ago records. The missing piece is a soup tureen lid. I have noted it, and the replacement is available from the original supplier at a cost that is within the current household allowance. He looked at her for a moment. "You verified the historical inventory. It was the most efficient way to identify any discrepancy," she said. He came into the morning room. He moved without the performative quality that she had noted in Lord Aldwych. The elder Lord Aldwych always moved as though conscious of being in his own space, but Marcus moved as though simply present in a room, neither claiming it nor deferring to it. She found this, without particularly deciding to find it anything notable. "Miss Emsley," he said, "the supplier renegotiations, the last 4 years." She was quiet for one full second. "Yes. You did that work." "I did," she said. He picked up the china inventory she had set on the table and reviewed it. His expression did not change, but he read the document with the genuine attention of a person who reads documents rather than performs reading them. And this, specifically, was the thing that made Charlotte press one hand briefly against the edge of the sideboard, because it had been a long time since anyone with any authority had looked at her work as though it were real work. "The market rate comparison notes," he said. "Those are yours as well." "Yes." He set the inventory down. "I have been asking myself," he said, "how the supplier margin at a house in London compares favourably with the contracted rates at the main estate." He looked at her with the precise attention she had first seen across a ballroom. "I believe I now have an answer." Charlotte straightened her spine and continued with the morning room provisions. She was not going to make anything of what he had said. She had been doing real work for 8 years in rooms where the real work was invisible, and she was not going to let one act of recognition become a dependency she could not afford. She had learned not to count on things that merely looked like acknowledgement. The Harrow Park fortnight assembled itself with the mechanical inevitability of these events. 12 guests, 3 of whom were the senior Aldwych family connections, who formed what Charlotte had privately labelled the institutional circle, their presence in any room giving it the quality of a formal verdict before any evidence had been heard. There was Lord Cavendish, who was 71 and had opinions about suitable marriages that he communicated through a combination of volume and historical precedent. There was Mrs. Fortescue, whose connection to the Aldwych family was traced through a complicated cousin arrangement, but whose interest in the succession was as direct as anyone's. There was Sir Edmund Price, who was a financial connection of the Aldwychs, and who had some investment in the ducal estate's stability that Charlotte had not yet fully traced. And there was Miss Crane, who arrived on the second day with her mother and her remarkable amber satin and her laugh that carried across a room, and who looked at Harrow Park with the expression of a woman who was measuring it against a picture she had already formed, and finding it, if anything, better than expected. Charlotte noticed that Miss Crane looked at Harrow Park with a proprietary attention. She noticed also that Miss Crane looked at her with the particular expression that beautiful women in confident positions sometimes offered to plainly dressed women doing household work. Not cruelty, not contempt, but a comfortable certainty that the category distinction between them was natural and required no defence. "You are the household manager," Miss Crane said on the morning of the third day, finding Charlotte in the corridor near the library, where Charlotte had gone to locate a guest catalogue that had been misfiled. "Yes," Charlotte said. "Lord Aldwych speaks highly of the household arrangements." Miss Crane said this with a generosity that communicated clearly that she was being generous, that noticing the household arrangements at all required a descent of attention that she was making willingly. "Lord Aldwych is kind," Charlotte said, which was not precisely true, but was not worth correcting in this context. "I imagine it requires considerable skill," Miss Crane continued, which was, Charlotte noted, the sentence people used when they were about to qualify the skill as belonging to a modest category, managing the daily provisions and so forth. Charlotte looked at her. 47 supply agreements, she said, across 2 properties, with a combined recoverable margin of £1,460 over 4 years. 3 staff management reforms that reduced the turnover rate in the kitchen from 1 replacement every 8 months to 1 every 3 years. The October creditor negotiation that retired the outstanding Harrow Park timber debt 18 months ahead of schedule. She picked up the misfiled catalogue. That is the skill. The daily provisions are not what requires the skill. Miss Crane looked at her with an expression that had, for a moment, lost its comfortable certainty. Then she recovered it. Quite, she said. Charlotte returned to the morning room with the catalogue. She did not feel triumphant. She felt, as she generally felt after these exchanges, a specific clarity about what she was and was not. She was not going to apologize for being precise, and she was not going to allow the precision to be reclassified as impertinence. She had done real work. It was real work. That was not a matter of opinion. She had been at her desk for an hour that evening, working through the estate's October accounts, which she had brought from London because they required attention and the fortnight provided time, when she became aware that the library adjacent to her small sitting room had someone in it. She did not investigate immediately. The library was not her concern at this hour, but the sound from it was specific, not a guest reading, not a footman tidying. Someone was at the piano. Charlotte set down her pen. She had not known there was a piano in the library. She had noted, on her previous visit, the catalogue cards and the careful organisation that had stopped. She had not been into the inner alcove where, she now understood, there was a piano she had missed. The playing was not accomplished in the way of a trained performer. It was accomplished in the way of someone who had learned a specific composition thoroughly, and was playing it from memory with all the attention they had, caring very much about getting it right. The piece was not one she recognised immediately. It was old, possibly from the previous century, a slow and measured thing with a repeated phrase in the lower register. She sat at her desk and listened. 14 minutes, she counted. Then the playing stopped, and there was silence, and then the sound of the piano's lid being closed with careful deliberateness. She returned to her accounts. In the morning, she found Marcus in the library. He was at the catalogue box, replacing the cards in their original order. He had apparently spent some time at this. She counted approximately 40 cards that had been recatalogued since the previous day. "Your mother kept this," she said. She did not mean to say it. It was simply what the evidence indicated. He went still for one moment, in the way he went still, which was not dramatic but was complete. "Yes," he said. "The handwriting on the cards is the same as the one in the household instruction book," Charlotte said. "I compared them when I first came in January." He looked at her. "You noticed that?" "I notice most things," she said. "I am sorry for the loss. The catalogue is a useful document. I am glad it is being maintained." He did not respond immediately. He replaced the card he was holding. Then he said, without any performance of the words, "She would have found your supplier renegotiations very satisfying." Charlotte looked at the catalogue box. She had not expected that sentence, and she did not know what to do with the warmth it produced, which was an unfamiliar problem. She picked up her list from the table where she had left it, the estate account summary she had been compiling, and returned to the morning room. She had managed wool merchants and creditors, and misplaced soup tureen lids. She could manage this. She was less certain about that, on reflection, than she usually was about things she told herself she could manage. The Harrow Park timber debt, Charlotte discovered on the 5th day of the fortnight, was not fully retired. She found this because she was reviewing the October accounts and cross-referencing them against the January consolidation she had prepared, and there was a figure in the estate ledger that did not correspond to the figure in the consolidation she had received from the estate steward. The discrepancy was £430. She looked at it for some time. Then she went back to the January figures, then back to the October accounts. The timber debt had been declared retired in the steward's summary 6 months ago. The actual creditor records, which she located in the estate filing box. She had located the estate filing box on her second day at Harrow Park, because locating filing boxes was among the first things she did in any house, showed that it had not been retired. What had been retired was a portion of it, with the remainder renegotiated into a private arrangement with Sir Edmund Price, who was currently sitting in the Harrow Park drawing room drinking the Aldwych champagne that Charlotte had sourced at a 12% reduction. She sat with this for a very long time. Sir Edmund Price had an investment in the ducal estate's stability. She had not yet fully traced it, she had told herself 6 days ago. She had now traced it. The arrangement was documented. There were 3 letters in the filing box that made the arrangement explicit. Sir Edmund Price had retired the remaining timber debt in exchange for a private consulting agreement that gave him preferential access to the estate's investment decisions for a period of 5 years. The agreement had been signed by the estate steward. It should have been signed, if it were a legitimate agreement, by the Duke. It had not been signed by the Duke. Charlotte set the 3 letters on the table in front of her and looked at them. She pressed one hand briefly against the edge of the desk. Then she picked up the letters and went to find Marcus. She found him in the East Garden, where he walked in the mornings. She had noted this on the second day. "Your Grace," she said. He turned. He looked at her expression first, she noted, at her face before the letters, the way a person looks when they have learned to read a room before reading its contents. "Miss Emsley." She held out the letters. "The timber debt," she said. "It was not retired. The remainder was transferred to a private consulting arrangement with Sir Edmund Price. The arrangement was executed by your steward without your signature. I believe you should read these." He read them. He read all 3, standing in the East Garden in the morning light. His expression did not change in any way that was visible, which Charlotte had come to understand was not coldness, but was the particular discipline of a man who had learned that his face, in certain positions, was a public document and should be maintained accordingly. When he finished, he looked at her. "How did you find these?" "The October accounts showed a discrepancy against the January consolidation," she said. £430. The estate filing box had the original creditor records. "The estate filing box," he repeated. "Second shelf, east corner of the study, behind the estate map box." She paused. "I located it on my second day." He was quiet for a moment. The East Garden held the morning light the way she had imagined from the catalogue card, warm and specific. "You have been doing this," he said. "For how long?" "At this house?" 6 days. "At the Aldwych townhouse?" 4 years. "Before that, at my father's estate." She looked at him directly. 8 years, total, of this kind of work, without a title, without a signed agreement, and until this morning, without anyone finding the filing box. It was not an accusation. She said it in the tone in which she said all factual things, level, with no inflection reserved for injury, because injury was not information, and she was giving him information. He looked at her with an expression that was the most unguarded she had seen on his face. It was not pity. She would have ended the conversation immediately if it were pity. It was the specific look of a man who has just understood the full weight of what is in front of him and is holding it without flinching. "Miss Emsley," he said, "would you be willing to remain at Harrow Park after the fortnight?" She looked at him. "In what capacity?" she said. "That," he said, "is what I would like to discuss with you, but not here." He folded the letters with deliberate care. "After dinner." She looked at the East Garden. She looked at the letters, and at his hands, and at the particular quality of his attention, which was the most complete attention anyone had directed at her work in 8 years. "After dinner," she agreed. All 12 guests were present, including Lord Aldwych at the head, Sir Edmund Price arranged on his left, Miss Crane in the amber satin that caught every candle, and Lord Cavendish, delivering a monologue about the natural order of good families that Charlotte listened to, with her professional face on, and her mind on the 3 letters currently locked in the top drawer of her sitting room desk. Charlotte was not at the dinner. She was not a guest. She managed its execution from the kitchen corridor, where she confirmed the service timing with the cook, addressed a small crisis involving the second-course sauce that had separated and required reconstruction in 11 minutes, and then confirmed with the senior footman that the wine service matched the sequence she had arranged. Marcus found her there at 20 minutes to 9. "You are not at dinner," he said. "I am not a guest," she said. He looked at the kitchen corridor, and at her, and at the sounds of the dinner proceeding, as arranged beyond the door. "You organized all of this?" "Yes." "And you are standing in the corridor?" "It is where the work is," she said. It was a simple statement. She did not make anything of it beyond what it was. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "Come to the library at 9. Bring the letters." She brought the letters and her annotated account summary and her own notes on the discrepancy, because if she was going to present evidence, she was going to present it completely. She found him already there, the library lamp lit, the piano closed in the alcove behind him. She laid the documents on the table, in the order that made the argument clearest. The October accounts first, the January consolidation beside it, the creditor records next, the 3 letters last. 29 of the 37 supplier agreements, she said, I renegotiated. £430 is the unexplained discrepancy. The arrangement with Sir Edmund Price was executed without your authority and gives him preferential access to investment decisions for 5 more years. She paused. He is currently advising your father on the question of your marriage. Marcus looked at the documents. He looked at them the way he read everything, genuinely, without performance. My father does not know about this arrangement, he said. I believe that is correct, she said. I believe the steward managed it without your father's knowledge or yours, and that Sir Edmund Price has allowed that ambiguity to persist, because the arrangement serves him, whether or not either of you is aware of it. He was silent. She let him be silent, because she had said what needed saying, and silence after information was appropriate. You have been managing a house, he said at last, and finding conspiracies in the filing boxes. I have been doing my job, she said. The conspiracy was coincidental. Something shifted in his expression. Not quite amusement, but the closest thing to it she had seen on his face, which was a face not arranged for frequent amusement. It lasted 1 second. Then he looked at her with the direct attention that was his defining characteristic. Miss Emsley, Charlotte. He used her name for the first time, without apparent awareness that he was doing it, which she found more significant than if he had done it deliberately. I am going to present these documents to my father and to Sir Edmund Price at the formal household meeting I will convene tomorrow morning. I would like you to be present. You want me to present them, she said. It was not a question. You found them, he said. The argument is yours. She looked at the documents. She thought about it the way she thought about everything, fully, without hurry. She thought about what it would mean to stand in a room and present evidence to a man who had arranged a private financial agreement around a ducal household he did not legally control, in front of Lord Oldwick, who had never once credited her name to the work she produced, and before an institutional circle that had spent 12 days treating her as one of the household provisions. She thought about her father's face when he had looked at her across the desk, about the wool merchant Graves saying she was the most organised party he had dealt with in 20 years, about the catalogue cards in the box on the library table, maintained with care, and then stopped, abruptly, and left for someone else to find. Yes, she said, I will present them. Marcus stood. He removed his coat, the evening tailcoat, dark and precisely fitted, and laid it over her shoulders, with the matter-of-fact directness of a man who has noticed that the library is cold and has addressed it, not as a gesture, but as a practical action, the way she had noticed the champagne cases were in the wrong order and had reorganized them. She went still for a moment. He did not say anything. He simply looked at the documents and asked her, with the same level attention he had given everything she had shown him, to walk him through the January consolidation figures one more time. She walked him through them. She did not move to return the coat. The morning meeting was convened in the Harrow Park dining room. Lord Aldwych was present, arranged in the chair at the head of the table, in a configuration that communicated clearly that he considered this a family meeting at which he was presiding. Sir Edmund Price arrived with a slightly elevated colour and an expression that Charlotte categorised as prepared deflection. Lord Cavendish was there because Marcus had apparently informed him the night previous that his presence was required, and Lord Cavendish had come because a duke requesting something with a certain quality of tone was a request that required honouring. Mrs. Fortescue sat to one side. Miss Crane was not present. Charlotte had ensured that the meeting was convened before breakfast, which was the only reliable mechanism for keeping the morning room guest circulation away from the dining room. Charlotte stood at the far end of the table. She had her documents before her. She had her annotated account summary, her notes on the discrepancy, and the 3 letters. "My lord," she said to Lord Aldwych, who was looking at her with the expression of a man who has encountered something in a room where he did not expect to encounter anything, "I have identified a discrepancy in the Harrow Park estate accounts that requires your attention." Lord Aldwych opened his mouth. Marcus, from the chair to his father's right, looked at his father without expression, and something in that look caused Lord Aldwych to close his mouth and look at Charlotte. She presented the documents in the sequence she had arranged. She laid the October accounts and the January consolidation beside each other and identified the £430 discrepancy with the precision of someone who has rehearsed nothing because she does not need to rehearse information she has verified from source. She moved to the creditor records. She moved to the 3 letters. "The arrangement with Sir Edmund Price," she said, laying the 3 letters at the centre of the table where they were visible to everyone, "was executed by the estate steward without the Duke of Harrow's signature and without Lord Aldwich's knowledge. It gives Sir Edmund Price preferential access to estate investment decisions for a remaining period of approximately 5 years. I verified this against the original creditor records, which are in the estate filing box." Sir Edmund Price said, "The girl is misreading a routine administrative arrangement." "The letters," Charlotte said, "are in your handwriting, Sir Edmund, and they reference the timber debt by its specific original figure, which appears in no document except the original creditor records and these 3 letters. A misreading would not produce that specificity." The room was quiet. It was the particular quiet of a room in which something has been made undeniable. Lord Aldwych looked at the letters. He looked at them for a long time. The colour that came into his face was the specific colour of a man who is revising a picture he held with confidence and finding the revision uncomfortable. He picked up the January consolidation and the October accounts, and he looked at the discrepancy, and he looked at it the way he had looked at Charlotte's account summary 4 years ago, with the expression of a man who is finding something surprising and inconvenient and real. Sir Edmund Price said 3 more things. The first was an objection to Charlotte's authority to present documents at a meeting of this kind. The second was an alternate interpretation of the letters. The third was an appeal to Lord Aldwich's historical judgment. None of them addressed the specific figure. Marcus stood. He did not raise his voice. Marcus did not raise his voice. He looked at Sir Edmund Price with the complete, cold attention of a man who has made a decision and is delivering it without performance. "The arrangement is void," he said. "It was executed without my authority, and I am repudiating it now, before witnesses. The estate solicitor will be notified by close of business. Your consultation access to the estate's investment decisions ends today." He looked at his father. "I should have been informed of the timber debt's restructuring. That failure is the steward's, and I will address it separately. The information that allowed this meeting to happen came from Miss Emsley. He looked at Charlotte. The room looked at Charlotte. Lord Aldwych said, in the voice of a man who is making a statement that costs him something, "Miss Emsley." He stopped. He looked at the account summary, the one she had prepared 3 days before the ballroom evening, the one he had presented as a packet of evidence of the estate's sound management, without mentioning her name. "The household accounts," he said. "The supplier renegotiations." He set the summary on the table. "These have been your work." "Yes, my lord," she said. Lord Cavendish, who had not spoken since the presentation began, made a sound that was not a word but was, Charlotte assessed, the sound of a man recalibrating. Lord Aldwych looked at his son. He looked at Charlotte. He picked up the October accounts again and then set them down. He said, without warmth but without contempt, "I appear to have been looking at the wrong person." It was not an apology. It was not designed to be. It was the partial, late, imperfect acknowledgement of a man who had genuinely not seen what was in front of him, and had now seen it, and could not unsee it. Marcus crossed the room. He crossed the room in the full view of his father, and Lord Cavendish, and Mrs. Fortescue, and the departing back of Sir Edmund Price, who was leaving because there was nothing left to defend. He came to where Charlotte stood at the far end of the table with her documents before her, and her spine straight and her expression, which she had maintained throughout the presentation without a crack, still composed. He took her hand. Her bare hand, she had removed her gloves to manage the documents, and he raised it and pressed his lips to her knuckles, in the deliberate manner of a man performing an action that has witnesses because he intends it to have witnesses. The room understood this before it could articulate it. Charlotte looked at him. She did not look away. He said, in a voice that was for her but was heard by the room, "You wanted a wife, not me, you said." She had said it, in this room, 4 days ago, when he had first raised the question of her future at Harrow Park, and she had understood, correctly, in its initial form, that the shape of what he was proposing was a position and a function and a social utility, and she had said, quietly and precisely, that she had spent 8 years being useful, and she would not like to be useful in a different room, with a different title, if the title was all that changed. "I said that," she confirmed. "You were right," he said. He was still holding her hand. "I did not know, when I said it, what the difference was. I know now." He looked at her with the unguarded expression she had first seen in the East Garden, the expression of a man holding the full weight of what is in front of him. "I am not asking for a wife. I am asking for you. Those are not the same thing." Charlotte pressed her free hand briefly against her own sternum, which was the only concession her body was going to make to the considerable amount happening in it. She thought about it, the way she thought about everything, fully, without hurry. She thought about the filing box on the second shelf of the study, the catalogue cards with their careful handwriting, stopped and then resumed, the East Garden in the morning light, the coat placed over her shoulders with the directness of a man who had noticed something practical and addressed it, the 14 minutes of music she had counted through a closed door. She thought about her father's face, about Graves the wool merchant, about the January consolidation and the October accounts, and 29 renegotiated agreements, and 8 years of real work in rooms where the real work did not have a name attached to it. She looked at Marcus. "Yes," she said. It was a simple sentence. She meant all of it. The private proposal came 2 weeks later, in the library at Harrow Park, in the early evening when the house was quiet. The formal engagement had been announced with the specific expedient speed of these situations. Lord Aldwych had been, if not warm, then at least cooperative, understanding that the social machinery required motion and providing it. The announcement had been received by the Harrow Park Circle with the range of responses Charlotte had anticipated. Mrs. Fortescue's complicated silence, Lord Cavendish's eventually expressed opinion, that the Duke's judgment on estate management had been clearly demonstrated, and he supposed that judgment extended to other selections, and Miss Crane's departure to a family engagement in Bath that had apparently arisen with some convenience. Charlotte did not hold any of these responses against their holders. The world had rules, and the rules were real, and people who had organized their lives around those rules could not be expected to revise them in an afternoon. What mattered was the revision. What mattered was that it was happening. Marcus came to the library in the early evening and stood in the doorway, in the way he had stood in the morning room doorway on her second day at Harrow Park, and he said, "May I?" "Yes," she said. He came in. He did not sit. He looked at her at the desk with the annotated accounts and the lamp and the particular focused stillness that she had brought to every room she had ever occupied, and he said, "The engagement announcement was required by the situation." "I know," she said. "This is not that." He looked at her without any performance of the words, "Not because it is convenient or appropriate, or fitted the requirements my position imposes, but because you found the filing box on the second day, and you brought the letters to the East Garden, because that was where I walked in the mornings, because you had noticed. Because you play the piano in the library at midnight when you think no one can hear you." She went still. "You play it well," he said. "It is the same piece, my mother's piece." Charlotte looked at him. She had thought, for 14 nights, that the music had been him. She understood now the quality of his stillness when she had named his mother's catalogue cards. The piece was not his, it was hers. They had been sitting in adjacent rooms for 14 nights, playing the same composition separately, and this, specifically, was the thing that made her eyes go warm in a way she was not going to concede to. "You heard," she said. 14 nights, he said. "I heard all of them." She stood. It was not a dramatic motion, she simply stood, because the conversation required her to be standing for it. He crossed the room and went down on one knee in front of her, in the library, with no audience but the catalogue cards, and the piano in the alcove, and the lamplight, and 8 years of invisible work between them. "Charlotte Emsley," he said, "will you?" She looked at him for a long moment. She thought about it the way she thought about everything. Then she said, "Yes." He stood. He straightened his cravat, and she saw, for the first time, that it was slightly crooked, which meant it had been slightly crooked for some time, which meant she was going to have to address that, and she reached up and straightened it, with the precise 2-fingered adjustment of a woman who notices these things and addresses them without fuss. "It has been crooked," she said, "since the dinner on the 7th evening." He looked at her. 14 days. "You are very difficult to approach at dinner," she said. The expression on his face was the warmth she had understood was there all along, beneath the structure of the cold, like a room that had been closed for 3 years and needed only the window opened. They were married in February, in the church adjacent to Harrow Park, on a morning when the East Garden held the particular cold light that would, in 6 weeks, become early spring. Charlotte wore pale cream silk that she had selected herself from a supplier she had renegotiated with 18 months previous, and the ceremony was attended by a small group that included Lord Aldwych in the front pew, offering the specific cooperative silence of a man making peace with a revised understanding. Eleanor Marsh, who had arrived at Harrow Park 3 months earlier as the new lady's maid, and had proceeded to become the first person in the household to offer Charlotte a cup of tea, with genuine warmth on a cold November morning, and the practical information that the East Wing linen press had a stuck door that had been stuck for 6 months, and she had fixed it herself with a hairpin, stood near the back of the church, with the expression of someone who had watched something important happen, and was quietly satisfied about it. Geoffrey Holt, who had been the Aldwych family solicitor for 30 years, and who had reviewed the price arrangement letters with Charlotte a week after the dining room meeting, and told her, with the directness of a very old man who has seen a great deal and stopped softening his observations, that the analysis she had prepared was the clearest legal financial summary he had encountered in his professional career, sat in the third pew and looked at the ceremony with the expression of a man who had placed a correct wager. Lady Cavendish, who had heard about Charlotte's account summary from her husband and had sought Charlotte out at a London assembly 2 weeks after the Harrow Park fortnight, and asked her, without preamble, whether she would consider reviewing the Cavendish estate accounts, sat beside her husband in the second pew. Charlotte had agreed to the Cavendish review. She had found 3 recoverable discrepancies in the first week. They named their son James, born in the November of the following year, who arrived with a great deal of force, and Marcus's particular quality of stillness, already present in his expression at 20 minutes old, which Charlotte noted, and which Marcus found, from the beginning, very satisfying. James would secure the Harrow succession. The line was established, and both Charlotte and Marcus knew it, and had said so quietly between them, with the pragmatic affection of people who have been honest about all the other things. Their daughter Eleanor came 3 years after James, named for the lady's maid who had opened the East Wing linen press with a hairpin, and who had since moved to London to manage a household of her own. Eleanor arrived with Charlotte's expression, the level, assessing attention that catalogued a room before committing to it, and Marcus had looked at her, and then at Charlotte, with the look he had in the East Garden, the look of a man holding the full weight of what is in front of him. The Harrow Park accounts, fully renegotiated and reorganised in the 2 years following the marriage, became a reference document. Charlotte had prepared them initially for the estate's own purposes, and then, at Geoffrey Holt's suggestion, and with Marcus's endorsement, had prepared a clean version that Holt circulated to 3 neighbouring estates, whose managers had been asking, for some time, whether there was a better method for the supplier review process. There was. There were 11 estates using some version of the Harrow Park account system within 4 years, each of them producing recoverable margin they had not previously identified. Charlotte did not think about the credit exactly. She thought about the work. The work was real. It had always been real. The question was only whether anyone with eyes was standing in the right room to see it, and the answer to that question had finally, after 8 years, changed. It was James who found the library catalogue box one Saturday morning and carried it to his mother with the seriousness of a 4-year-old who has discovered something important. Charlotte was at the library desk with the spring accounts when he appeared at her elbow with the catalogue box held carefully in both hands. "Mama," he said, "there are cards." "There are," she said. She set down her pen and looked at the cards. Someone kept them very carefully for a long time. She glanced toward the window, where Marcus had appeared in the garden below. She knew the particular quality of his footfall on the garden path, the morning walk, the unhurried pace of a man who had somewhere to return to. "Your father's mother made them," she said, "and then someone else played her music. And then your father found the person who was playing." James considered this information with his father's specific gravity. "Is that a good story?" he asked. "Yes," Charlotte said. She looked at the catalogue cards, and at the East Garden through the window, and at the spring accounts in their careful order. "It is a good story." Marcus came through the library door with the measured, unhurried step of a man who moves through rooms without claiming or deferring to them. He saw his son at Charlotte's elbow with the catalogue box. He saw Charlotte at the desk with the accounts and the particular stillness that meant she was finishing a thought. He stood in the library doorway and looked at the room, at all of it, the lamp and the cards, and the boy and the woman who had found the filing box on the second day, and had handed him the truth in the East Garden, and had answered every important question in simple, direct sentences, and who was now watching the garden, and not yet watching him, but who knew, with the complete attention she gave everything, that he was there. He did not announce himself. He simply stayed in the doorway, watching, the way he had stood outside a closed door for 14 nights to hear the same composition played by 2 separate people who had not yet known they were listening to each other. Charlotte looked up from the accounts. She looked at him across the room, and something in her expression settled. Not into surprise, not into performance, but into the warm and steady quality of a person looking at the thing that is exactly where it is supposed to be. "You are watching again," she said. "Yes," he said. James, finding the adult portion of the morning resolved to its usual configuration, set the catalogue box on the desk beside his mother's accounts with appropriate care, and went in search of more useful discovery elsewhere in the house. The east garden was beginning to show the first green of April. The library held the morning light. Charlotte turned back to her accounts. Marcus came into the room.